good to see you all, although again, as I say, can't see you all. We've got a really interesting session with the newly anointed Professional Pensions Woman Innovator of the Year, Georgia Stewart, who's the Chief Executive of, well, she's told me she pronounces it Tumelo, but well, we'll get into that one as we get into the session. Do tweet about the session today. The hashtag is hashtag PLSA Tech 20. So do tweet about what you hear. And if you want to send us in some questions, then do send us in some questions. And we're going to have a bit of a fireside chat with Georgia after she's introduced herself. So good morning, Georgia. Nice to see you. I have seen you. You're going to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Tumelo, and then we'll have a bit of a chat. Take it away.
Cool. Great, thank you, Richard. Morning, everyone. I am sitting in Edinburgh at the moment, and I'm gonna, as Richard said, tell you a little bit about Tumelo and the background of the company, and then I can also give you a quick demo and show what it looks like. And then, yeah, it would be great to get into some Q&A with you, Richard. So I guess starting at the beginning, I started Tumelo with two co-founders, Will and Ben. We all went to university together. We all went to Cambridge. We all studied natural sciences, although I was focusing on environmentalism and climate change, and the boys were doing physics. And whilst we were there, we did a lot of focus work on climate change, and specifically we looked at using the university endowment to create change in that space. So Cambridge University has a £6 billion endowment. Lots of it is invested in the stock market. And we were campaigning as a group of students to get the university to be a bit more transparent about where that money was being invested, and ideally to back resolutions that were being put forward at some of the companies we were focusing on, specifically on healthcare and workers' rights, and especially on climate change. So we had a pretty successful campaign at university. We were hooked up with lots of other universities across the world, like Berkeley and Harvard, and had CIOs sign up to a lot of resolutions that we're going through. Specifically, we had really good success at an Exxon Chevron AGM, where for the time we got the highest proportion of positive votes for a climate proposal that had been to date. So we also made some kind of front page news. And I guess what we realized during the process of that campaign was that shareholder engagement was a really brilliant way, firstly, to affect change and get people to listen, but secondly, to engage individuals. And we kind of, as everyone does, I think in the pension industry, had a hard time engaging students and engaging professors and, you know, getting people to associate and really care with the work that we were trying to do. And shareholder engagement, focusing on a specific issue at a specific company with a kind of time deadline, was a really, really good way to get people involved and get them digitally signing open letters and the type of thing that at the time was really important for our campaign to be successful. So I guess moving on from there, what we've built is a platform that replicates some of that work we were doing at university, but at scale. So the aim is to help pension members and retail investors to be able to have a voice on climate change or gender equality or CEO pay, issues that we know people care about at companies that their investments are invested into, whether that's through a company pension scheme or through a stocks and shares ISA that you maybe have on one of the newer investment apps. So in doing so, what we can do is bring more of a voice and more accountability and more transparency to the shareholder engagement space and to responsible stewardship, which is obviously important and I think increasingly so. And at the same time, we can engage people who may otherwise be pretty disengaged, especially with their pension. And that's something that we found out over the last year. We didn't previously have a focus on pensions, but in talking to some of the larger providers and learning more about the pension space, we realized the level of disengagement that existed and the level of financial literacy was obviously so low. And what we could do with Tumelo really was tell a story for someone that actually engaged them and got them more interested in their pension than they might otherwise be. So I suppose in terms of a user journey, what Tumelo does is it helps someone to understand, firstly, that their pension is invested, often into equities, which are companies that these people would have heard of, like Microsoft or Google or Facebook, and then to show them that there are issues going on at these companies, which we're keen to hear their opinion on. and that we can then feed that opinion back to a stewardship team or fund manager or someone who has the power to actually create change and influence change at the organization about which the shareholder proposal is concerned. So we have a team in Bristol working on this proposition. We are 18 people based obviously in the Southwest, although kind of spread around the place at the moment. I'm in Edinburgh and there's lots of folks abroad as well. And mostly we're a product team, so people working on design, and we do loads of user testing. So we test with 7 candidates, like either pension members or real users or retail investors every Tuesday. So everything we're doing, the way we speak and the way the product is built is really driven by data and feedback that we get from real people who we're trying to engage. And then we're also building out kind of a small business development team working on the PR and sales and building partnerships, especially partnerships with other people in the ecosystem like Make My Money Matter and Share Action, who are obviously doing brilliant work in this space already and have been doing so for a while. And there's a lot we can do to kind of learn from each other and also help each other move forward by combining kind of different expertise, whether it's tech or campaigning, for example. So I just thought before I hand back to Richard to do some Q&A that I could show you quickly what the platform actually looks like. So I will share my screen. And here, hopefully, Richard, can you see my screen there?
I can.
Brilliant. Okay, hopefully everyone else can see my screen. So here we have a white label version of the demo dashboard. So this is what a pension member might see. Normally it would be in the branding of their provider or their company. And what we're showing someone in this instance is the different funds that make up their pension pot or their retirement savings plan. What we're doing in terms of, from a transparency perspective, is showing people the individual companies that are sitting inside that pension pot. So these are the companies that are in people's pensions. And we're showing it on an individual personalized basis. So, you know, if you're Sally and you've got a specific set of funds, we're going to show you exactly what companies are in those specific funds. But we do so at an aggregated level. All of our testing shows that most pension members are not interested in seeing a fund by fund breakdown or like specific scoring. They want to see what companies are inside their pension overall. And that's why here we're showing kind of aggregated version. And we categorize by industry rather than impact because we're trying to be as objective as possible across the platform. Lots of the members that come onto our platform aren't coming there with an ESG focus. You know, most people don't know what ESG is, which I'm sure everyone kind of understands, but you know, a lot of people will come here and the comments we get are, you know, I didn't know my pension was invested, or I can't believe my pension is invested in so many companies. You know, sometimes we have feedback saying, you know, why have you invested my pension in companies? You know, there are really clear questions from people that they really didn't understand when they got to this point that actually their pension was invested. And obviously we have different levels of financial literacy in terms of the users using the platform. Some people are kind of shop floor workers, other people are really high up in banking institutions, and they obviously experience the platform slightly differently and take different things from it. But just back to that point on impact, here, this is really about giving someone information and greater transparency and taking them on a journey to understand that their pension is invested, not necessarily that ESG is the most important thing for every individual. So we try and be as objective as possible so people can make up their own minds about, you know, what they think about the companies in their pension and how they might associate with an Apple versus an Adobe versus an Airbus or a McDonald's, for example. A user can jump into any one of these companies and find out a bit more. Again, we try and have objective information here so they can go to the company website or read the company objective. And then the real bit here, which is important for engagement, is this section on open votes. So what we feature here are all shareholder proposals. That means they are questions that real shareholders have put forward to these companies, asking them to change something about their reporting or the way they operate normally. So all of these questions have been submitted this summer, so they're the previous shareholder resolutions, and they've been submitted, as you can see, for companies like Walt Disney and Walmart, Lululemon, Google, or Alphabet, and they're asking questions on a real range of issues, from lobbying to animal welfare, to plastic shopping bags, to human rights. So there's really something for everyone to get involved in. And we have a level of personalization here on the right. So someone can say, oh, I'm really interested in human rights or equality. And that is something that we do see people commonly using. Everyone seems to be interested in equality, whereas animal welfare is something that's a bit more divisive. Not everyone is interested in getting involved in that, at least from the users we currently have on the platform. So it's really interesting to see how people are personalizing the use for themselves. Someone can jump into any one of these questions. So if I take like the Walmart question here, which is a shareholder has asked Walmart this summer to report on the impact of its single-use plastic shopping bags. They've put forward an argument, which we've summarized, basically saying that they think Walmart is lagging behind competitors like Costco and Trader Joe's who already have stopped using shopping bags. And they're saying like, they think this is financially material, it's bad for the reputation, it could be financial or operational risk as well. Walmart has then put a response, which again, we've summarized into the shareholder proposal here. And if someone wants to see the original content, then they can go to the AGM document at the bottom. But we're really summarizing it quite objectively. We're just trying to shorten it down and take out financial jargon so that it's appropriate for the mass market consumer who's using this product. What we then ask is for members to tell us how they think their fund manager should vote. So obviously a fund manager at the end of the day has the voting right. They are the one that is kind of contractually obliged to vote at an AGM. So what we're doing is trying to provide insight ahead of those AGMs so that fund managers and stewardship teams and trustees can understand what preferences members have, like what ESG issues are most important to them, maybe what benchmarks there are, what CEO pay is acceptable to people versus, what number of women on the board or what percentage of women on the board does a member deem acceptable. So we're getting some really interesting insights about, what flies, what doesn't. And I think at the moment, the stewardship teams are using this as a kind of signal, a high level indication of what is important to people and how they might be able to prioritize their engagement policies or their stewardship policies to align better with what underlying members think and just to be more aware of that, as opposed to using on a vote by vote basis at the moment. But we'll see how that is going to evolve over time as more people use the product. And I guess finally, we have the results page. Obviously, as members are giving their opinion, they then want to hear back about what has the result of a vote been. So for example, if we take the Netflix campaign spending, someone can see how the overall vote went. So in this case, this vote was rejected, but it was pretty close actually at the shareholder proposal. And someone can see what the vote timeline was. So whether they voted, what other people in their workplace said, and also what their fund manager's vote was. So in this example, actually Dollar Tree, where the vote was actually approved by all of the shareholders, so Dollar Tree now has to report on climate change, a member can see why their fund manager voted for that issue. So they can see that actually the fund manager thought this was important because members would benefit from additional information about how that company is meeting its sustainability targets. And likewise, if a fund manager votes against a member or the majority of members, then they're able to put a reason down. And most of the time, if they're voting against a climate change issue or animal welfare issue, they have a really clear reason that either it's kind of overly prescriptive or they already have some other engagement ongoing with that company on that topic. And members really love that fund manager justification aspect, which we're actually pulling forward. So at the moment, it's really hidden in this results page. And we are redesigning the dashboard so that that justification is right on the front page because it's really an important kind of feature of the product for members. So the last thing to say probably is that we have a communication system that lies over the top of that dashboard so that when someone comes on board and gives their opinion on an issue, we can update them about what's happened. So this week, for example, we were able to write to all of our members and tell them that those that were involved in the Procter & Gamble deforestation vote, that has been successfully passed and that Procter & Gamble need to increase their reporting on their palm oil in their supply chain. So this is really exciting wins that we can share with members that have participated in that stewardship activity. And we also will share upcoming votes. So for example, this week, there was a vote at Wetherspoons. We were talking about gender equality on the board. So it's really interesting stuff for members to get involved in and kind of tangible things that we can talk to them about. I think the email we sent on Wednesday had a GIF of a beer filling up and down, and we're asking people, what side they were on. So it's really engaging stuff, and probably quite far removed from what people are used to being talked about in the pension space. So I guess that's the change that we're trying to create, is to get people engaged, and to do so on the basis of kind of their values and things that they can emotionally connect with. And I suppose finally, in doing so, what we hope to do is help the stakeholders in the pensions industry. We want to help trustees to better understand their members and have a scalable, automated way to communicate with them. And we want to help providers to build longer term, more meaningful relationships effectively with their customers, and digitalize some of those relationships that may currently not be super digital or even paper-based. So Richard, I'll hand back over to you. Hopefully that's a fair introduction and useful for people.
Yeah, no, tremendously, and I've already got more than half an hour's worth of questions, so this is going to be a bit of a rattle through, I think. One very simple one, first of all. Somebody pointed out in the Q&A that the Walmart AGM was on the 3rd of June, so presumably that wasn't a live demo, that was just a demo site. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Yeah. Good. So normally it's a live system.
Yeah.
So Tumelo, where does the name come from?
Oh, well, have you ever tried to buy a URL, Richard? That's
have I ever done what?
Question. I tried to buy a website. Yes, Tumelo, yes. It's a South African word. It's from Lesotho language. It means believe. So we wanted something aspirational, something that didn't sound financy, something that was a bit more feminine, we thought, than most of the finance names out there. So Tumelo is what we settled on. And at the time of naming, we could afford the URL. So
always an important consideration.
It is an important consideration. Anything with 4 letters costs like £100,000. So okay. So let's just try to unpack the proposition first of all. Who's your customer, Georgia? So our users on the platform are pension members and retail investors, so people that are kind of using their personal money to save for the future. The customer, the people we partner with, are generally pension providers or investment platforms. So the institutions that are providing kind of administrative services to people so that they can more easily invest and more easily save for their future.
Okay, so the party that signs up in the first place is the institution, the pension fund, and then their members can gain access to it, as opposed to just somebody off the street logging in and joining in.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually started out, interestingly, thinking that we would have a direct consumer proposition, just in the very early days when we were kind of doing testing and learning. But we realized quite quickly, as everyone will know here, that no one has any idea where their money is invested. So we would ask, okay, we're here to show you transparency and ask for your opinion on these issues. People would say, well, where's my pension invested? And so we spent loads of time replying to people's emails saying, yeah, we're going to try and help you do this. And then we realized actually the best way to do this and to have the most impact, reach the most people most quickly, would be to work with their providers. And obviously it's kind of a win-win, because we make the impact we're seeking to make with transparency, and the providers can build that connection with consumers they already have on their books.
Okay, good. So just to bring it to life, my day job is as a professional trustee. If I rang you up and said, George, I've got a pension fund that wants to sign up, can you bring the process to life for me? How do we go through from us having that conversation through to my pension scheme members getting involved?
Yeah, that's a good question, and also something I'm still trying to work out, because it's kind of different for everything. I think in the pension space, there's a lot of stakeholders, and kind of everyone operates a little bit differently. I think that there's 2 ways we can do things. We can, if someone wants to launch a platform and they have a pretty standard pension scheme and lots of members are in the same pot, in the same investment, we can launch a platform pretty easily without connecting to much other tech, and just have a version that looks like that provider and that has all of those pension members' funds included on the platform. When you get into slightly more sophisticated territory where you have potentially self-selectors as part of your scheme, or there's lifestyling, then we need to be connected to the administration system so that we know what Sally has inside her pension versus Evan, or so that each user has a personalized experience, because that's when users really associate with what we're showing them. They don't just want to vote on a poll, they want to vote on something that they know is in their pension. They want to express their opinion on stuff they know that they feel ownership over, and that is why showing them something personal to them is really important. So then in that case, what we would do is say, well, who is your administrator? What investment platform do you use? And we just need to hook up with that investment platform so that we can provide that to the member. And from there, it would flow the same way.
So, but what's the communication program out of the pension fund? So I've now signed up with Tumelo, and I've got to tell my members that it's there. It's obviously web-based. So I just tell them there's a website, then they can click on that website and get involved.
Yeah, so ideally, the platform, Tumelo, would be connected with their existing pension platform, their existing portal. So wherever a member currently goes to register, to change their contribution, to confirm their expression of wishes, update their email, that's where we would be. So we'd be part of one experience for a member. And then what we do for the pension trustee or the pension fund is that we have a comms pack. So it's like a launch schedule, effectively, that we give to you. It's ready-made emails, ready-made assets, like digital posters, intranet links that you can use at your leisure, basically, to spread the word. And I guess we do that. We've learned a lot over the last year about how to communicate this to members. And we do that because it's really important that we have kind of one clear message, that there's awareness before members are invited to sign up. Just effectively learnings from having launched in multiple places now and working out what works best. And I think, although the concept, you care about BP, you want to vote on a climate change issue, like, it's quite simple. Members really still need to be taken on a journey. They need to be told your pension is invested, or your pension is managed by someone called a fund manager, and this is their responsibility. And you're going to be voting on an issue that's going to be sent to your fund manager. So we do need to take someone on that journey, and having kind of centralized communication where we're saying the same thing and using the same words for the same stuff is really important. So we try and provide as much of that comms and kind of launch material as possible, being as ready-made as possible, so that it doesn't deviate too far from what we know members enjoy and understand.
Okay, so I've got a few more questions, and then I'm going to dip into the questions being submitted by the delegates. Hopefully a fairly straightforward one. First of all, how many members have you got signed up to the platform or using the platform?
So at the moment, we have about 1,500 people using the platform on a regular basis across two schemes, like two pension workplace schemes. But we're rolling out with the Legal in General across 40 more schemes and a couple 100,000 members over the next year. So it's really exciting to kind of apply our learning from those first 1,500 and do that at scale. Okay,
good. And then the second question along the same lines is, how many of them are voting?
So we have, sorry,
I was going to say you have 1,500 who regularly vote. They're not necessarily all of the members of the pension scheme.
Yeah, so we haven't got all members of the pension scheme. I guess two things. One is that we were running pilot schemes, so there were only select members of the pension scheme were invited. So we only did people on the default. There was no one from the self-select was invited, just because of keeping the pilot really straightforward. So there was some things like that. And then obviously only a proportion of people that were invited actually went through to register, which again is like learning from those comms and thinking about how we can better launch and better distribute. I think of the people that did register, about half of them voted. So even once they've registered in the first place, actually not everyone went on to vote. And that's, again, like learnings for us in terms of how do we improve that onboarding journey so that people understand the action that they're taking. I guess on that, we also need to think from our perspective about what is a really important event for a user, because we definitely saw really interesting differences across the workplaces where one of them, the users spent a lot of time looking at the individual companies and didn't vote as much as in the other workplace where people were more interested to have a voice immediately and spent less time looking at the individual companies. And I think that correlates with financial literacy levels. So it's really interesting to kind of follow that and also look at user behavior over time. So I think one of the really important things is about people voting and coming back onto the platform again and again, because it's not very useful if we have a member kind of engaging once and then leaving. The whole idea is how can we get people to engage with their pensions over their lifetime which really means, you know, a monthly visit would be ideal for us. That's really what we're looking for. So at the moment of people registered, we have 45% monthly return user rate. So again, we could definitely have it higher, but for pensions, it's pretty good. So we're happy with that. And I guess now we're thinking about how do we increase our open rate and our click-through rate to have people coming back. But we do see kind of a consistent number of votes on each of the proposals that are being put on the platform, and that hasn't dropped off. And actually, even in quieter season, because actually AGMs are seasonal, so you have a lot in kind of March through to February through to the end of June, and then you have fewer throughout the rest of the year. So it's been good to see that actually on a per vote basis, the number of vote preferences we're getting from members is actually staying stable over the last 6 months. And that's something we weren't sure about when we first launched the platform. You know, that was something we were really paying attention to, was do people come back or do they drop off after the first or second time? And we can also see behavior on the platform changing, which is nice because I think it looks kind of an indication that people's understanding is changing, and hopefully that's an indication that financial literacy is improving. So if you can imagine, when someone first comes onto the platform, they don't normally know their pension's actually invested. So there's a bit of a journey to kind of take them through the company's page and then the vote page. And as people use the platform more, so the kind of fourth or fifth time someone comes back, they increasingly spend time on the results page, whereas often people don't visit that for the first, second or third time that they come. So that's, again, something that we were surprised by. We thought that instant gratification and results were going to be really, really important to users, but actually it's something that in the first instance isn't that important. They just want to have a voice. They want to test this kind of voting preference function. But over time, I think the results and actually, okay, what is happening with my voice and what is my fund manager doing? What has happened at this company is going to become more important. But that kind of takes a level of financial literacy before people start to think, okay, what is this chain of investment that I'm kind of somewhat involved in, and how do I work out, you know, who's accountable for what?
So a 45% return rate, I mean, I think most pension websites would kill for that return. That's a fantastic return. But what would be quite interesting is to know the percentage of pension scheme members who are signing up for it. So your 1,500 members, are they the 1,500 of 32,000? Or are they 1,500 of 2,000? That would be quite an interesting number to find out whether this is a niche sport or whether it's genuine mass engagement. So what's your purpose? Are you an engagement tool, or are you something else?
I mean, if you're trying to put us in a box, I think we're
no, sorry. Okay, let me reframe it then, because I'm not trying to put you in a box. And when I talk about engagement, I'm talking about me engaging with pension scheme members.
Right. Okay.
So are you a tool to help me engage with my pension scheme members, or are you something else?
I think we are many things to many people. There are so many stakeholders in the pension space. To a member who is our primary stakeholder, we are giving them transparency and a voice. We're empowering them. Actually, the feeling that most people talk about is control, or the thing that they actually are. We're not actually increasing people's control. We're only increasing their transparency and accountability. But the word they use for us is they talk about control. That's the feeling that they have, and a kind of reduced sense of anxiety. So that's what we're doing for them in terms of value proposition. For trustees, yes, absolutely. The aim is for us to help engage members, and also to help members tell trustees that communicate more easily in a kind of more useful or decision useful way. For provider, I would say we're an engagement tool, but also they are working to improve their stewardship and to increase their accountability and deal with ESG, which is really difficult and subjective. So I guess in a way we're also helping them kind of move. We're one of the tools they can apply to move through that ESG space, and I'm sure, you know, Sustainalytics and other types of analysis that are kind of a little bit more financially focused are also going to be super useful in that space. So we're kind of slightly different. And then for a fund manager, we're insights. You know, we are helping them to understand sentiment, potentially just public sentiment, but ideally sentiment of underlying investors. And I think over time that's going to change, you know, how much how a stewardship team responds to what members are thinking and how that's dealt with. There's no framework for this. And so it's, right now we're providing sentiment and kind of insight to them, and exactly how they're going to use that is something that we need to keep exploring. But certainly the stewardship teams we're working with at the moment are using us in that way, and you know, are obviously being pretty progressive in doing so. So I guess Yeah, we're an engagement tool, but we're also a stewardship tool, and ideally, at the end of the day, we're making impact on behalf of members.
Okay, so I want to come back to the stewardship point in a moment, but I just had a quick delve into the delegates' questions, and a really interesting one from Craig. Thank you, Craig. Have you been able to track a correlation between engagement with your website and engagement with the pension scheme? So, have members who have signed up to your website then become more engaged with their pension scheme, and as a consequence, paying a more appropriate level of contribution?
Great question, Craig. So that is, I guess, the golden ticket for us, is what we're trying to prove. We haven't tracked that. We haven't been able to, because we don't at the moment have a connection between our platform and L&G's portal, for example. So that's something that we're working on with them, is integrating that in kind of in parallel as we roll out across the next year, and with other providers. So that is exactly what we're going to be looking at, is do we get an increase in people's engagement with the provider? And ideally, are people right-sizing their contributions as a result of kind of being more engaged or using Tumelo? And we can actually start to track that pretty soon. So we're building at the moment a link from the platform back to the provider's platform. So in an instance, before we're fully integrated, we can still see whether people are using the platform and then clicking see the value of my pension or increase my contributions, and go back and we can test that way. So I don't have the answer to that yet, but watch this space. Hopefully, if you ask me that in 3 months' time, I have an answer.
Well, hopefully we'll have the tech conference again next year. We'll be able to ask you. And then that would be a really interesting bit of data, that and also the number of members who are actually signing up and taking part of it, see if it is genuinely an engagement tool. Mm-hmm. So going back to the stewardship bit, the votes that they cast, what constitutional value do they have? What purpose do they serve?
Yeah, well, I think I touched on it in terms of the insights piece. I think the actual answer to that question is not answered, if I'm being totally honest. I think that pension members or retail investors are at the moment submitting an opinion on an issue over which they have no real right to a vote, right? So we obviously recognize that, and we're clear with members. The platform says, I would like my fund manager to vote, or when we send emails, we say, have your say. It's not, have a vote on this shareholder proposal and it's going straight to Lululemon. So we are clear about that. And I think that from a fund manager and stewardship team perspective, it's kind of in their camp as to how they use it. I think if we as a platform came out and mandated that everyone listened to members and voted that way, I think trustees would be worried and fund managers would not want to speak to us. So, we have to approach this carefully and measure in a measured way. And fund managers and stewardship teams do stewardship differently, and they often will spend a lot of time and invest a lot of resources in trying to understand the nuances of a vote at a company. And they, of course, will also have engagements which are not visible on the AGM document. So they may already have discussions with companies ongoing. So I guess the way that our preferences work at the moment is that they're sent to the stewardship team 10 days before the AGM, so generally before the stewardship team placing their own vote. And they're then able to see an indication. So if the stewardship team are on the fence about an issue, then maybe that can help them. But certainly at a high level, what we're able to do is say, okay, we know that members of this scheme really care about equality, and gender equality is number one issue because everyone votes this way and everyone votes. Whereas animal welfare is less of a priority because actually it's more controversial across the scheme. There isn't a scheme view and less people engage in these issues. So that's the type of insight that we're able to gather, and on a dynamic basis. So rather than doing a survey once every 5 years, we can see that changing on a month-on-month or kind of, I guess, annual basis, where it means that hopefully scheme stewardship policies and then fund manager stewardship policies can be somewhat informed by what the people putting the money into the system actually care about. And it's not to say that Joe cares or knows more about Tesla's human rights issues than the fund manager. Of course, that's not the case. So, but we can get an indication overall of what hopefully a representative number or representative sample of the pension member body think. And I suppose what we'll be doing is evolving with the stewardship industry. I mean, the PLSA released that implementation statement and the voting guidelines, and people still trying to work out what a significant vote means, for example. So it's difficult for us to kind of say exactly how we're expecting people to use the information, but more information can't be a bad thing, and kind of more accountability and more transparency is definitely appreciated by members. I guess we did think about this in a slightly different way in August. We actually trialed a different feature alongside voting, where we asked people to upvote questions for companies. So looking not just at the shareholder proposal piece, but actually how can we be more proactive? Actually, Catherine from Share Action had also suggested, could you be more proactive in your approach as opposed to shareholder proposals, which is quite reactive because the questions are already there and we're just asking for opinions. So we had members submit questions for 4 companies where the stewardship team had meetings upcoming, and the most upvoted question by members got asked by the stewardship team to BP, it was. And then that response from BP got put back onto the platform. So that's just an example of a feature we were able to test this summer. And it's not voting based, but it still has that kind of engagement and transparency and positive change element to it, and that members are able to use. So I guess it's TBC, we're still evolving this space and working out exactly what people are going to do with the information that we're producing as a platform.
Okay, but the votes are advisory. Although actually your website does say giving a voice to the shareholder, and of course pension scheme members aren't shareholders. Often the fiduciaries, the trustees aren't shareholders. Often the underlying fund manager isn't the shareholder. So I do wonder if that creates a tension and a risk that members vote in one direction and then for perfectly good reasons, maybe the majority of the other asset owners voted in a different direction. So I wonder if that creates a tension which could lead to disengagement eventually.
Well, I think that, I guess it does create a tension. We have a justification system on the platform so that if there is a good reason, as you say, there often is, why a custodian or whoever is the shareholder has voted a different way, they can just explain that on the platform. And actually users don't have a negative reaction to that. We haven't had any complaints come through the platform over the last 6 months. Not a single person has complained about the way that an AGM has gone. But people do want the justification feature. So before we built that, then people asked why. They were like, okay, well, why is my fund manager voted a different way? I don't understand why anyone would vote against climate change at BP. And maybe there isn't a justification for that, but in some cases that there really is. And it's useful for users to be able to see that, especially on issues which are not as clear cut and maybe overly prescriptive, like that maybe the animal welfare issue at Lululemon, which could be seen as overly prescriptive and kind of shareholders getting too involved in the way that companies are managed. But that's a fine response to send back to a user as long as we speak in a way that they understand. And I guess on the shareholder point, it's difficult. We've got a lot of different customers, so we do often work with on the retail side where actually we are potentially dealing with shareholders or people who are not maybe named on the share certificate that could be voting their shares if they kind of organize themselves to do so. At the moment, it might take you to write an email to your platform or kind of write a letter. But that is something that for us, we have to manage our language depending on what type of users we're speaking to. And actually, we don't have a user-facing side to our website at the moment, which is something we're working on. So how can we create a page for pension members who maybe are being introduced to Tumelo so that when they Google us, they can kind of see a really clear description of who we are to them. So yeah, that's on the to-do list in terms of public-facing work.
So I suppose there is always the risk that it'd be interesting to track this one in due course. Lululemon, the vote goes against the members' preferences, the members' advisory vote. Whether there is a risk that they then leave the pension scheme and forego all of the other good things about the pension scheme, including the employer contribution. I mean, it would be a bit extreme, I suppose, but I suppose they could feel that strongly about it. One to monitor as well. I mean, that's one of the risks. As a fiduciary who might be buying your service, what do you think are the other risks to me of using the Tumelo service?
What are the other risks? So I think that we had a risk, what you're mentioning there, the idea that people might be kind of shocked by what's inside their pension and they might want to leave the pension scheme altogether. That's something that we obviously did think about and we were worried about. However, a lot of the testing that we had done previously indicated that that wouldn't be the case. So I referred earlier to this direct-to-consumer offering that we initially built. It was a very, very simple website. And what we were doing was showing people what was inside a few pension schemes. So we just, information we could find through looking at like fact sheets and then speaking to individual fund managers, we had pulled it through onto this platform. And then we had thousands of people come through and we asked them, what's your pension? And people who knew where the pension was were able to then tell us. We could show them their funds. And then we asked them what would they like to do as a result of now seeing their underlying holdings. And we had a range of questions. One was obviously vote on issues that you care about, hence why we built a voting platform. But we also asked people whether they wanted to share their holdings on Facebook, move their money was something we looked at, start investing sustainably was another option. And actually moving money was one of the lowest things on the list of 7. Sorry.
At the compliance department.
That's the compliance department. Moving people's money was one of the lowest things on the list, and higher up on that list was start investing sustainably. So the people were obviously thinking about, and we randomized the order of the list, so it wasn't about what was at the top and what was at the bottom. So people are thinking about their next investment decision separately than, oh, what am I going to do with the investments I have at the moment? And so we weren't actually going into the pilot particularly concerned that people were going to see their holdings and want to move their money, because for most people, what they're really worried about is a return. They're worried about risk and they're worried about performance, and they probably don't understand how fees work, so they maybe don't worry about that. But that's the type of thing that people are concerned about. And then if they can sort that out, they then are also interested in sustainability. But people are not seeing that they have 0.2% invested in Shell and are then really worrying and asking immediately how they can move their fund. We really haven't seen that in the last 6 months. So it was a risk, but it's something that hasn't played out and that we really don't worry about very much anymore. I think part of the reason why maybe people don't want to do anything is because they're able to have a voice. So we are giving them an outlet rather than saying, okay, here's your companies, lump it, live with it. So I guess it's about finding a happy medium. But if people are, really horrified by the idea that they're invested in a company that, they really hate and they find abhorrent and they can't stand, then they do need another investment option. And hopefully the communication channels are there so that that person is able to, speak to a trustee or understand, what's the future of ESG with the scheme and are we working to implement that? And in most cases, the answer is yes. We are working to implement an ethical fund or an ESG fund or something like that if it's not already in place. So yeah, I guess the risk is there, but I don't think it's that large. And if people feel very, very strongly about it, then hopefully there is change that they can make without having a kind of knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're running out of time. So on the strat paragraph on the front page of your website, it sets out your objective, and there's 3 things on there. Engagement. So yes, it does. It could well be an engagement. It will be great to see the statistics in due course, see whether we can tick that particular box. I think there is still that risk of disengagement if votes go against people in due course. Transparency, yeah, definitely does that. That's a big tick there. But although again, with that risk that people don't like what they're holding, and a voice. It clearly does give members a voice, but it's not quite clear how powerful that voice is. The more members you need to sign up, the more members you sign up, I guess, the better. What's the objective? How many members do you want on the website or using the service?
I think that we have an internal company objective that in 5 years' time, we have 10 million users registered. So we're definitely looking for scale and large numbers. And ideally, we would also have a footprint in the US, where I think that's, people are also pretty proactive about share ownership or investment, whichever it is. And certainly in Europe, there's a lot of, they're turning pretty strongly towards ESG, and there's a lot of talk about democratization and stewardship, and all these pieces are also coming together there as well. So yeah, but our aim internally is to have 10 million people from the UK on the platform in 5 years' time.
Good luck with that. So in the last minute, one last question. So which votes have gone through the system so far that have delighted you, and which votes have disappointed you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that, I need to think about that. I mean, votes that get passed, obviously, are exciting, especially because that's really changed in the last 10 years, or in the last 8 years since we started doing this, where actually it was pretty rare to have a climate change vote pass, if it had even really happened at all at that point. So, I mean, the Procter & Gamble vote last week is on palm oil. That's really exciting to me. I obviously study conservation. I'm very worried about the situation in South America and other places. So, yeah, I guess for me, that's one of the most important votes. But actually, for users, people were really interested in the outcomes at Tesla. So human rights at Tesla actually has the highest number of votes on that system. It was there on the system for longer because Tesla moved their AGM. So we also have to caveat for that. But yeah, that's definitely something that users really care about, and human rights comes up again and again. I'm definitely really passionate about environmentalism, but on the whole, people really care about that. In terms of votes that have disappointed, I guess something that we don't see that much is gender equality votes. They tend to come through on the director re-elections as opposed to specific shareholder proposals. So it'd be interesting to see kind of more of that, and certainly more on the climate change. There actually wasn't that many proposals this year on climate change. There were some really high-profile ones, like that submitted by Aviva Investors and others to BP. But it'd be good to see more on that front. So I guess that's kind of general answer, but there was a lot of interesting.
Tough question.
Yeah.
So Georgia, thank you very much for joining us. It's been really interesting. It's a really interesting idea. I mean, I think there are some risks in there, but it'd be interesting to see how it develops, see whether those risks manifest themselves in due course. Good luck with getting to your 10 million people, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the time. Everybody else, thank you very much for watching. The session will be available on download or on demand next month. If you can rate the session, please, when you go back to the link in the auditorium. But thank you very much for coming in and listening, and thank you very much, Georgia, for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, we're taking first steps, I guess. So I agree that there are risks and that it's not perfect, but it's exciting to be here, and I'm keen to hear feedback from all the people that are involved in our project so far.